we are where we are. We were in 2007 and 8. We have ended up in a stalemate. That stalemate has ended up in another handshake. If you look at it, it's very personal. That this is about the country, not about them.
As part of a collaboration between The Elephant and Africa Uncensored, both of us are going to be running a set of features and stories that speak to the Kenyan and African experience. And since we are in Kenya, who better to start with than David Ndii? David Ndii, well known, of course, to Kenyans, but for people who are watching us from across the world, you are an economist of note, as well as the head of strategy and technical and policy at the National Super Alliance. And as we were talking right before this, I added a bit of a note to that, if NASA exists. Does NASA exist anymore?
Thank you very much, John, for having me at this conversation. NASA exists because we have a legal framework now, since a couple of years back, for setting up political coalitions. So NASA is established as a political coalition between the parties that put it together. And it will continue to exist until those parties either decide to dissolve it or until the end of this term of Parliament. Because the law provides for coalition to exist for a term. So it's a legal entity. Yeah, because it's a legal entity, then it exists and has structures. And if you look at the NASA parties, they actually, the parliamentary party, they actually have shared positions and power in Parliament. So they are operating as a single entity, just the same way as CORD operated as a political opposition during the previous term.
Yeah, but of course, CORD didn't have the handshake to deal with. CORD didn't have the sort of camaraderie between stalwart of the opposition, Raila Odinga, and the current government to deal with. CORD didn't have that kind of friendship to be able to think about. And if we are talking at least from the legal, technical, and even in terms of positions, that point of view sounds like a bit of a de facto, a de jure description of what NASA is. But the fact is that a lot of people look at the opposition, NASA, and say, well, there's no opposition.
Actually, it is probably easier for NASA now as a political body than it was between the August 8th election and the handshake. Because you see, as political parties, and you look at the political leaders, NASA came together for purpose of contesting an election, which you either win or lose. If you win, you go to government, we had a power sharing agreement, you then govern. If you lose, you then become the opposition like CORD had become, and CORD had experience of doing that. That interregnum where the election gets subverted and we go into a different mode, which is more of resistance and protest and sort of back to the trenches, fighting for electoral justice. That was more difficult for NASA because it wasn't set up for that. Yeah. And many of the politicians who are in it, that's not what they signed up for. Yeah. So that created actually more difficulties for people like us who decided strategically that if this happens, this is what we're going to do. And those who, that was not their original plan. Their plan was to do sort of formal business as usual politics. They didn't sign up for these other sort of protest movement politics. So in a sense, the handshake takes you back to
a more formal
engagement of business as usual. So that's probably more in their comfort zone than what we were doing before.
Yeah, but the real question here is, David, is there an opposition to speak of at a time when there's runaway corruption? that we're dealing with so many challenges in terms of the youth bulge that could threaten the very existence of this country in the near to mid-term, and a host of issues that would require a strong voice. Is there really one in this arrangement, albeit that it's comfortable for some of the politicians who are in NASA?
Let me sort of probably give that perspective.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, Mashira Maina, describes Kenya as, and our political predicament, as a country where which has reached, I think you said, a sort of turning point. It reaches a turning point, political turning point, and it refuses to turn. Yeah. When I wrote an article which became very controversial and talked about Kenya being a cruel marriage, I used a sort of different language to say the same thing, that if you look back, if Kenya does not survive, because I was questioning whether it's a politically viable entity, if Kenya does not survive, or if it sort of gets the sort of situation we got into 078 and then that boils over, you will look at historical moments where there was opportunity to sort of harness sort of political forces to build a nation, and we failed to do so. And I think the situation we are in, the handshake is another of those moments. Which is a turning point, or which is a historical moment for trying to resetting, resetting our politics, and building a sort of viable politics. Yeah. Whether we will do it or not, that is open to question.
You're preempting my question, which was, what is your feeling about the handshake itself? That's what
I wanted to say. I hadn't finished. I said, now, if you look at this moment, what makes it such a moment? We've been I think the defining thing is elections. We started multi-party in 1992. Now, the defining pillars and features of multi-party politics is elections. We've done everything else, I think, which you need to do to create a multi-party democracy. The one thing we can't seem to do right is elections. And elections is the most important element. Without free and fair elections, you cannot have a functioning multi-party democracy. If you look at the how many, is it 6 elections?
Yeah.
Of the 6 multi-party elections we have done, only one has been accepted generally by everybody as free and fair. That's 2003 election. If you look at that election, Moi was of course retiring. It's the first time an incumbent was not contesting, because he was retiring by virtue of the 2-term limit. It so happened also the way the politics played out, that the 2 contending candidates were from the same community, were both Kikuyus. So Kenyans were choosing between 2 Kikuyus, so it eliminated the ethnic polarization. Yeah. So it was a very peculiar, a very unique election. But if you look at all the other elections, they were controversial and they were violent. If you look at all the elections, the other election which, there was one other election which wasn't, only one other election which was not violent. It was controversial, but not violent. And that's the 2013, when Kibaki was retiring. All elections where the incumbent is defending have been violent, including this one. Yeah? So there's something about inability to transfer power is at the heart of this crisis. Yeah. Why are people not willing to give up power by losing an election?
let me put that same question to you. Why, in this context, you are at the heart of NASA.
Yeah.
You understand the political animal that is NASA, but also with this overarching view of all of the elections that we've had. How do you answer that question for yourself? Why is it that we are unable to transition?
Yeah, and that's fundamentally when you ask me about the handshake.
Yeah.
How did it come about? The handshake came about because, in fact, if you back up, if you look at the NASA platform, it was a platform built on implementing the Constitution. So we set out quite early and outside of the public eye to say that the 2017 election must be about implementing the Constitution, because if we don't implement that Constitution, then the things which have sort of messed us up in the past will happen. So we set out to do that. And you see the contest, the people who frustrated it are people who clearly were determined, and they made it quite explicit that they were against very many aspects of the Constitution. So what do we have? We have the answer to your question. We have been unable to use a constitution reform, institutional reform, to remove the so-called status quo, the sort of vested interests, economic and political interests that have held this country hostage since independence. The people who subverted the independence election, the interests, let me say the interests. So those interests have been able to reassert themselves. Okay. That's what we set out to do in 2017. We were not able to remove them.
Yeah.
And that's why we started that protest movement, because the people cannot subvert the Constitution to maintain themselves in power. Yeah. But where we have ended up with the handshake is in the same sort of compromise. We are where we are. We were in 2007 and 8. We ended up with a stalemate in 2007 and 8, of the same kind of stalemate. We ended up with an elite pact. We thought that writing the new constitution and all of that, and all sorts of things we said we would implement, and reforms. So those reforms did not change the sort of fundamental structure of our politics. We have now done exactly the same thing. We challenged that system. We have ended up in a stalemate. That stalemate has ended up in another handshake, like the Kibaki-Raila one. Yeah. We have ended up with Raila Uhuru. And my concern, my sort of fear, my concern is that, again, we have reached a turning point and we will not turn.
On that thought, what exactly is behind it? Because every time Raila has come out to elucidate what the handshake is, he says the same things that were in the, I don't know how many point agenda, 12-point agenda, but doesn't really go a step further in saying, how are you going to implement this? That might be the work for the team that's been set up. But for a person who was the antithesis to everything that you described, the Jubilee government, because that's who you are describing, for a person who was the antithesis of all of that, to not have a more succinct description of what that handshake means, leaves very many people to speculate that, like what Farah Malim likes to say, at every political moment where we have an opportunity to turn, tensions are ramped up. We get to that point, and then a trade-off is made, a deal is made, and then the rest of Kenya is left to sort of, savor the crumbs from that deal. So what exactly is behind it? When you speak to Raila Odinga, what does he tell you about what exactly that handshake means?
The handshake, as I said, is a stalemate. Okay? You have to recognize, any political contest, even if it becomes a civil war, like South Sudan or Syria, when it's finished and you have destroyed everything, where do you end up?
At the negotiating table?
At the negotiating table. So the fact that you're going to end up talking to your enemies is a matter of when, not whether. The only situation when you don't is if you annihilate them. You defeat them and you overthrow them and you sort of kick them out. But if in these sort of situations, most likely you're going to end up at the table. Now, so if you ask yourself, what is, even when we were talking about what we were protesting against and when you're talking about and doing our own sort of electoral justice platform, it had very specific issues. And it said this is the things that, and if you read that document, it speaks to those issues. What has happened is obviously because it is now a compromise, it now accommodates the other side. It doesn't have as much clarity, and because it's now sort of language of compromise and diplomacy. Once something gets into the language of compromise and diplomacy, it loses the clarity. But what is it? I think the unique thing, the difference between this handshake and other things people we've done before, is that it is, if you look at it, it is very personal. Yeah, this is something which says me, Raila Odinga, and Uhuru Kenyatta have agreed to do the following as leaders. And we are going to lead the country in a process of doing this and the other. And they sort of go into all sorts of historical things and all sorts of things. So it's a very personal commitment. They say we take responsibility for all these things and whatever. So because it is very personalized, it doesn't have the structure that people, because I think people are looking for the sort of structured thing that you had, like during, for instance, the Kibaki, sort of the Annan negotiation. But I think the point that people are missing is that people are saying this is not a dialogue where people are going to sit on this side of the table and this side of the table as adversarial forces and negotiate outcomes. I think that's probably because that's the mindset that we are bringing to it. Well, what they said is, look, we have agreed. Yeah, we have agreed on all these things. So we have agreed on the agenda, because people usually sit to negotiate the agenda. We're saying we have agreed that these are the problems that we need to solve. And we are going to lead the process of solving them. Okay. So they've jumped, there's a step they have jumped. That step of process of negotiating, and they've gone straight to say, look, we have agreed, we don't need to debate.
So the horse traders are disappointed.
Yes, the horse traders are frustrated because they've jumped the horse trading stage.
All right. Another group of people that are disappointed, and perhaps rightly so, are the group of Kenyans who just view this as yet, as you said, as yet another compromise between two elites. Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta might be the protagonists that led us to this point, but they are representative of what is a central problem in this country. It might be in the document, but it's very counterintuitive for people who watch the elite take this country to the edge, to the brink, see the same elite turn from Saul to Paul, and then say that we are going to leave it in your hands. That's a group of people who might look at the handshake and think, well, A, what's different? Fine, you've agreed, but where is the Kenyan? You understand?
True. When we sort of said, I was the team that was leading the alternative platform, the People's Assembly and all of that. And I think when we said why we had decided to give this handshake some endorsement and the benefit of the doubt, we said very clear that we are giving them the benefit of the doubt. Okay. We're very clear. And we said, but it is the duty and responsibility of Kenyans to hold their feet to the fire and to make sure that this is about the country, not about them. Okay? But the challenge which we faced is they said, okay, here you are. You've been demanding and you've been leading this protest, and you've sort of demonstrated that you're going to do this. The other side, they have come to you and they said, okay, we agree. Where do you go from there?
Where do you go?
That's my point. See, so for us at that point, when they came and said we agree, Uhuru said he agrees, and he said let's not go into negotiations. Let's agree what we need to do, and do it. So that doesn't give you much choice, does it? Because you see, typically people sort of will want to come and negotiate, and that's as they negotiate. But he said, no, I agree, everything. Yeah, we have this problem. So the point is, yes, it's a very different sort of situation, because if you ask yourself, I think the parallel to ask yourself is people don't look sometimes at the sort of parallel of situations that we could end up in. The sort of situations we could end up in is what people see, what is the alternative to these elite sort of cutting these sort of agreements. The alternative is for them not doing it. And then you end up with South Sudan. Because if you ask yourself, what is stopping South Sudan? Where is South Sudan sliding into anarchy? Because two people, two human beings cannot actually, who have been together in the bush and everything, whether it's egos or whatever, because you cannot see the fundamental issues between Bashar and Kil are. So what you need is just now, if those people, if they come and back and, okay, say, fine, we have agreed. We need to solve this problem. What are the issues? One, federalism. They have about 4 or 5. The army, or 5 of them. If they write the list down and say, we've agreed, these are the issues we need to solve. Okay, let's sit down and figure out how we're going to do it. What are you going to tell them?
And then you tell them to go ahead.
You're going to have to give them the benefit of the doubt. So that we really had no choice. You really don't have a choice.